Matt, can you please, and Philip, you can give him could you please just tell us a little bit about how the song came together?
Yes. Thank you for that, Natalie. Greetings, everybody, all my nations. Um, this song actually started as I was embarking on a project to create our first album, Born Again. Um, we wanted to do a song originally about protest against the name of the Washington Redskins football team. I happen to be friends with a lot of indigenous people, and these are people who were very strong and adamant about the name change. And so much so that they came up with a list of names to offer to the Washington Redskins organization that still allowed the organization to honor indigenous people, but it wouldn't be necessarily a derogatory name. And so there was a strong campaign for that. And so we originally set out to we wanted to address that. I myself, I'm all for it because I don't like the name Redskins. Um, I think it is derogatory, and we just wanted to be done with that. And so I think one of the names that I suggested was okay. Well, since it's Washington D.C. and you want to honor, why don't we use the name of the indigenous people, right? So that's how the concept of Anacostans came about. And so then I thought, well, you know what? I'll go deeper than that. I'll tell the story about the displacement that happened in the 17th century in historic Anacostia with the people, and go from there. And so I knew very little information about it. There's very little information in books. There's very little information that you can find. Um, since they built the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian, I would always take my daughters there like every year. And I noticed that one year we went there, they had just installed a brand new exhibit on the second floor about the Chesapeake Algonquian speaking nations, and that contained a lot of information on there um, about this region and the people of this region, and so that's where I got a lot of my information from, and I started to write the song, um, and it all came together. And I had already set out to take a drive down to Piscataway. They have a museum down there. I wanted to go down there and have a conversation because I am not going to publish work about people without getting their blessing first. And so I said I got to go down there, share the lyrics with them, make sure everything is accurate, and get the blessing, spiritual blessing, of course. Um, so the blessing came before I even got an opportunity to drive down there. A mutual, well, friend of mine, he bought some land down in Piscataway, and he met some folks, and he said to me, he said, "Yeah, I want to introduce you to this kid, man. His name is Sebi. Um, he's real cool. I just feel like you two can connect somehow." I was like, "Okay." He's like, I'm like, "What about him?" He's like, "Yeah, he's this kid. He's Piscataway." I was like, "Okay, well, yeah, I need to meet him because um, I just would like to talk to him and share kind of the idea of what I had about the song." So he hooked it up. We got together. We met for lunch, and I let Sebi read the lyrics. And Sebi was like, "Wow." He said, "Where did you get this information from?" And I said, "Well, I got it a little bit of it from here, but I got quite a bit from the Smithsonian Museum on the American Indian on the second floor." And he started laughing, and he said, "My mom curated that exhibit." And I said, wait, Gabriella Tayac is your mother? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, wow, small world. So it all came together. Sebi and I have become family ever since that point. I've done a lot of fellowshipping with that family. Broke bread with Chief Billy. Big up to Chief Billy. Um, I've gone down and done inipi ceremonies, the sweats with them on occasion. So it's an honor to be considered a part of that. And what I've learned is that the Piscataway is it's a nation, right? So you have people that's a mixture of different walks. They all look this different. There's different shades, and so um, but it's part of the tributary, and the Naka tank or the Nakosh tank, or better known as the Anacostia, was a part of that. Was a part of that tributary, and once the Europeans came in and displaced them under the leadership of Captain Henry Fleet, they were able to go a little further down southern Maryland and merge with the local Piscataways and others down in that region, if that information serves me correct. And so that's where where that came
So
from.
amazing. And so you were able to the how did you collaborate them musically? Like how were they included in the song, or were they also included in the song?
Yeah, well, I already um, I wanted to hold space for some Algonquian singing, and so I asked Sebi if I was able to find something on YouTube that I can sample and put in the song. And he was like, well, I sing, and they worked with a group. They had a group, or they still have a group called the Uptown Boys at the time, and they were doing some stuff. And so he said, no, I can just come in and we'll lay down the vocals on that section. And they did, and voila. So it became a part of the strong fabric of the song.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Matt
Thank you.
Miller, Matt SwampGuinee, and Crank LuKongo. Please check out his album, and definitely the video is super beautiful too, where it's like you can see scenes along Anacostia, very important scenes on both sides of this line. Just a reminder, I mean, the Piscataway, we'll hear more about them. They're technically on the Maryland side, but those are lines drawn by colonizers. So they don't necessarily mean much. We go back and forth across them, so we'll learn much more. So we have a lot more to hear about this, but I want to thank you, Matt, for this
Thank
work
you.
because it's so important and allows us to make this amazing link between the Go-Go Museum and this rich history. So thank you
We
for
are
your work.
honored. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you, everybody.
yeah. And so he'll be
Blessings.
around during the Q&A so he can be able to answer more questions. I want to hand the mic over to Phillip Kulubya. He is a 2024 graduate of American University in School of Communication. He's a journalism student. He's been working at the Go-Go Museum since November. He is behind many of the artifact cards that you're seeing. He helped us to edit them, fact check them, get them together, manage the inventory. He also helped us with, I mean, we have over 230 digital artifacts in this museum, and Philip was intimately involved in tracking down permissions, reaching out to people. He's also helped us so much with the communication work, and very, very, very happy to hand the mic over to Phillip Kulubya. Thank you so much, Philip.
Thank you. So I'm Phillip Kulubya. I'll be your moderator for today, and it's just an honor to just be able to help with this inaugural panel. And I'm just excited to just honor the first people who inhabited this land. So I'll just start off by introducing our amazing panelists. So you can just start off by saying your name, your affiliation, and your answer to this one question. What does it mean to honor the Anacostans? So you can start.
My name is Jessica Jessie Swan. I'm Chief Jessie Swan's daughter, enrolled tribal member of the Piscataway Indian tribe in Southern Maryland. It's really an honor to be here speaking to you guys. And, if we don't continue to talk about this history, then it is going to cease to exist. So it's great to be here, and I can't wait to share some information with you folks. Can you hear me?
My name is Camila Bryce Laporte. I'm a folklorist. They call me a community scholar. I work independently. I go into communities and help people discover themselves. That's technically what I do. And I've been working with the Afro-Indigenous community for some time now, a few years. And I'm especially honored to be sitting next to Miss Swan. Her family has done a lot for not only for the Piscataway, but for other regional groups in this area. And I have a new friend.
Hi, I'm Armand Leone, and I wrote a book about the native history of Washington, D.C. I went back to the time, well, there have been artifacts found all through Washington. We'll have a chance to talk about that maybe later, including sites like the White House, a site a half a mile from the Capitol building, and the American Indian Museum, none of which are marked. And it's great when a cultural institution like this acknowledges and talks about the history of the native people who walk the ground here. And more later.
So we'll just start off with Jesse Swan on the topic of how official recognition works for just local Native Americans.
Well, I mean that's a little bit of a that's a heavy question. We were granted our official state recognition in 2012 after a long fight. But what does that mean? Officially now we're native? No. I mean let's be serious here. It was a monumental moment that actually just solidified what we've already known. That these people, my people, have been here since what we now know as the state of Maryland was established in the 1600s. Um, Becoming an officially recognized tribe within the state of Maryland has now proved as a stepping stone while we continue our fight for federal recognition to continue sharing our history, the rich history of this region.
My other question is like, what is the process of becoming just one of the 4,500 registered Native Americans in this area? How does that process work?
Well, I mean, we have an enrolled community of 4,500 to 5,000 people. Okay, that's just those members that have been enrolled. They've been able to connect a direct lineage within 7 generations. Okay, now being enrolled, that is a process that we have to follow in order to maintain continuity, to prove continuity of the community and the presence here within the region. And that all goes towards our package for federal recognition that we're moving forward. We were hoping sooner, but it might be a little bit later. But whether you're enrolled or not enrolled, that doesn't take away anybody's nativeness. The reality is that type of mentality of saying you're not native if you're not enrolled, that's an oppressor's mentality that has been shared over and over and over again. Now, is it an honor to be an enrolled member? Absolutely. Does that make you any less native than me? Absolutely not.
And my other question is, how is your family and the Piscataway Conoy tribe connected to Anacostia and just overall the land here, you'd say?
The Piscataway territory actually extended from the western banks of the Chesapeake all the way over, including DC, into Northern Virginia and into the northern panhandle of West Virginia. So pretty much everything that we know from the Bay Bridge all the way over till we get to Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, all of that, that's all Piscataway territory. Now, that's a lot of space that these people of, different families have all inhabited for years. We do have our 7 core families that really built the backbone of the tribe. That's the Swan Thompson, Proctor, Newman Savoy, Harley, and Butlers. Out of those, the 3 tri-core families that's where it all was concepted from is the Swan Thompson and Proctors. Anybody here from the DMV? Those are some names that we hear very often. And we're proud to say that we're still here. We're proud to talk about it, and we're proud to stand here and share these types of stories so that way we can continue sharing our history.
So just with my last question, just throughout history, even now, we see many sacred artifacts in museums around the world. And how do you feel about these just museums collecting these type of artifacts?
Museums collect things every day, where that's how you tell the story, and that's kind of how you you continue to tell that story to people who are unfamiliar. Where lines start to get drawn and opinions start to get really strong is, whenever they're in the process of acquiring these artifacts. If you're doing an archaeological dig and you find these types of things, it is their responsibility to reach out to the families. It is their responsibility to have the people who that is their ancestors involved in the process. And then that's where they go from there. That is entirely between that institution and that family. But there needs to be involvement of the first peoples of that land when they are taking things out of the ground.
Thank you.
No problem.
So my next round of questions will be for Pamela Bryce Laporte, and they will go over the topics of Black and Native American cultural connections in DC. So my first question is just your research paper, Black and Piscataway Land. It just maps like Black and Indigenous connections in this region. And can you tell us more about these connections, just historically?
I'm going to
in this
try to
area?
read this. I'm going to need your help.
Okay.
Before we get started, we're going to start with this land acknowledgement. And because I read it, I don't say it out loud. Some of the names I'm going to mess up.
Okay.
And this was the catalyst for the research that I did, and I think it's important to acknowledge where we are. Okay. I think it's important for us to acknowledge where the contributions of her family and the people like her. It's important. We acknowledge that the lands and the waters, now known as Maryland, are the ancestral home of the first people, including the Accohanic tribe, the Assateague people tribe, the Cedarville band of Piscataway Indians. Do you say Chaptico? Chaptico band, the Lenape, Nanticoke. That's the hardest one. Nashwash band of Indians, the Piscataway Conoy, Piscataway Indian Nation, the Pocomoke Indian Nation, the Susquehannock, and this is the hardest one. Yugohaini River Band, Shawnee, and other tribes within the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished due to colonialism. They have not vanished. We acknowledge that the forced removal of many of these lands, the ongoing environmental degradation, and our collective responsibility to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and the original stewards. When Ms. Swan spoke, she started speaking. She said, "We have been here since the founding of Maryland." In fact, her history dates back more than a millennium. Her people came here during one of the ice ages. There were people already existing here, right? But when her people arrived, and it's pressure, it's environmental pressure. Human migration has a lot to do with environmental pressure. They came here, they started new communities, they adopted, sometimes overran smaller tribes. They became tributes, right? But she comes from a great nation. And the way you know of their greatness is there was peace, generally speaking. There were advancements in agriculture that were made through her people that we are still practicing right now. We don't give them enough credit. When the European settlers came here, they saw how they were dressed and assumed that people wearing loins or animal skin were somehow backwards. But who wants to wear wool in heat? We all know. We live in Washington, D.C. Barbecue, you like barbecue? Thank you. Okay. A lot of our diet, a lot of our words, a lot of what we take for granted, her people have been preserving for more than a millennia. So it's a different frame. Okay. When Africans came here, there's a lot of theories about when we came here. Ben Soderman has one theory. People don't want, generally speaking, they don't want to believe that Africans could have come here prior to the arrival of the Europeans. but they arrived in Australia 75,000 years ago. So why couldn't we make a little trip over to America? We could do it. At the same token, they never want to think about Native Americans actually traveling to Africa. But it could have happened because the ocean waves, the Atlantic Ocean is still here, right? We would believe that they came across the Bering Straits to settle this area, but somehow forget that that DNA could have also gone in the opposite direction, right? Also, long before Africans and Europeans arrived, the native people of the Americas were already engaged in trade, right? Already here. That thing that we call cigarette, nightshade, that originated in the Andes. It arrived in Minnesota some 9,000 years later. They want to tell me that it came with a bird, but a bird didn't teach you how to do that. A bird didn't tell you that this was a peace pipe. A bird didn't tell you that this was medicinal, right? So they were already engaged in trade, and quite likely we were engaged with them. We will acknowledge the Asian migration. We will acknowledge the Viking migration, but there's a stop in your head when it comes to the African migration. We don't want to talk about it, but it could have happened, and there's evidence that it did. Okay, so let me start there. Okay, let me start there. There are several historic events that happen that makes most of you multiracial people. I can look at you and see. I can see Africa, I can see Europe, I can see Native American. There's something that happened politically that stopped you from denying who you are entirely. Who you are entirely. There are political motives behind that. And it's so important for Black, Indigenous, triracial people. People, you know you're triracial. Don't deny it. It's so important, as she said, for you to speak about who you are and claim who you are and honor who her people are. Okay, it's very, very important. So back to your question, which I absolutely forgot.
You pretty much answered it.
Oh, good.
So just my final question is, so you're a folklorist,
Yes.
and how would someone just kind of do what you do? Just collect stories? What do they do with these stories? How do they just share them with the world like you do? Can you just walk us through that?
Well, really, you're all doing it all. You know, you're doing it all the time. What I do is I go into your communities. I'll sit down, have a conversation, remember something that she says, and it will jog a memory. And I'll listen to something he says or something you said, it'll jog a memory. And I'll go into your communities and I'll start asking questions. You're doing it all the time. What I'm encouraging you to do is to document it. Pay attention to what your children are saying, to what your grandparents are saying. Don't let it go. As I began doing this research, people I could see were Native Americans. It was amazing how they came out and they told me it was done in secrecy. Older people don't want to talk about it. They did it in low voices. I said, why are you doing that? Because it was dangerous. It was dangerous. The English have a way of explaining what Indian Head Highway was. The Native Americans have a completely different understanding of what that means. You want to tell them what it means? You already know? Okay, well, let her tell you because it'll mean something different.
The history of Indian Head Highway is. I got a voice that carries, babe.
Okay.
The history of Indian Head Highway is just that. This was a war tactic. They removed the heads in and posted them as a warning of this is not Indian country. This is not a friendly area. And we have a town, we have a base, we have a highway, we have a school, we have all of these things that are literally just perpetuating that threat. Every day, whenever we're coming to and from DC, going from Southern Maryland back to DC to come to and from work, we're driving up and down a highway that is named after a threat towards my ancestors.
Yes.
Now, there has been a huge movement to change the name of that highway, correct? Now, the issue that has arrived there is we've gotten it dedicated, but we got to double down and go back to the state of Maryland and say, thank you for dedicating it. But now we need to make it official, since that's such a big thing. We need to make it official that this is no longer Indian Head Highway. And then we need to go to the end of that highway and we need to talk about the town of Indian Head. And then we need to go a little bit further down and we need to talk about the base and we need to talk about the elementary school. But these are threatening terms along the same lines as redskin.
Yes.
That this has just been made mainstream, and you hear all of this fake news,
Yes.
especially on social media about people want to bring this back, bring it back. I can assure you, nobody sat down and talked to my family.
Yeah.
They want to change that culture over in that organization. They want to talk about they're committed to the community. Let's sit down and have a conversation and see how you can make that commitment to Maryland's first people.
Right. There's also, for African Americans, you've heard this term. You've heard the term red bones, right? You heard the term Carmel Indians. Have you heard that term? Heard the term? There are lots of terms. They describe this community that includes Black, white, and Native Americans. In the textbooks, they're called triracial isolates. Why do you think they're called triracial isolates? They're called triracial isolates because they're triracial people. But there's another thing behind it. Triracial isolates was a way of saying Piscataway, was a way of saying Rappahannock, was a way of saying Chinook. So it's a way of disavowing her heritage. It's a way she sits on land with big heritage, and so do you, right? It's land that both natives and Blacks and whites work together. And what I've learned, and this is why I'm encouraging you to tell your stories and don't run from the pictures of grandma that looks white. Don't run from the picture of grandma that looks Black. Ask the questions, do your DNA, okay? Because down the road, you are going to see that they are probably, if not biologically native, they're culturally native. These people have worked very hard to preserve the people that I know that are multiracial have worked very, very hard to preserve native culture. And the way to do it is by knowing your own history. My job, I just go in there and let you know that you have something worth preserving, and listen to the terminology that's used to describe. If she falls for triracial isolate, she cannot claim land as a Piscataway. They already tried to disavow her. When I spoke to the chief of the Nottoway, she said it was very common for the tribes along the East Coast. My research is between the Atlantic and the Appalachian region. There are lots of first contact tribe with white and Black ancestry. That does not stop her from being Piscataway. That only counts when you're a colonizer and you want the land. So if she doesn't acknowledge who she is, and if you don't acknowledge where she is, who she is, what you are, it puts everything you own, everything you are up for grabs. So don't say triracial. You can say I'm triracial, but don't say triracial isolate. Say I'm triracial. I'm related to the uh, Cherokee people. I have relations in the. Say her name. Say her name. I am a Piscataway descendant. Say her name. It's as important as saying I am Yoruba. I am Ashanti. It's that I am Arawak. It's that important. So when I started this work working with the Baltimore Cultural Alliance to teach young arts administrators to look seriously at the diverse communities in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and the surrounding areas. And what we found is many of them came out of these communities that were associated with Native groups, Piscataway, Nottoway. If not directly biologically, then definitely culturally. We've been interacting with each other for a very long time. And especially now in this political climate, you have to say it. You have to acknowledge it. That's what my job is as a folklorist.
Thank you. And now we will transition to Dr. Armin Leon, and we'll just discuss how just scholars like him have explored the history of Anacostia through archaeological digs, other explorations. So my first question just is really just about your background overall, and you're trained as a pharmacologist and toxicologist, but you really started studying Native history as a hobby, and you even lead the all-volunteer DC Native History Project, and you're just really well versed in just the history of Anacostia, and you're a huge advocate for people saying the names of Anacostans, whether it's Anacostans, Tank. So, what are some of the key things that people should know about this tribe specifically? You'd say.
Well, the big major overall problem is I'll give a prize to anyone who can show me a clear monument or explanation of the Anacostans in the city or around the city of Washington. They walked the land here, but we have, and what I did was collect evidence of their, well, not only the Anacostans, because they're on the Bowling Air Force Base. It's rather easy to find. That's where the chief once lived. And it's pretty easy to find artifacts that would be directly related to them. But throughout the city, there are artifacts from Native Americans who lived here over thousands of years, none of which are marked or acknowledged. And that was a focus for what seemed to me to be a useful thing. What my orientation for getting into this was is that my work as a toxicologist enabled me to telecommute 20 years ago, and I started being able to go away in the wintertime. And an Australian friend of mine said, "You should come to Melbourne, Australia." And I recommend if anybody if you have a chance to go to Melbourne, it's a really functional city. I started going to Melbourne in 2008, and I could stay a couple of months. The first year I got there in February, I think February 8th, they did Sorry Day, where the Prime Minister stood up and said, "We're sorry how we've treated the indigenous people, the laws we've passed, the troubles we've given them." Well, let's just say that I went back to Australia every other year, actually, between 2008 and 2020, and I got sensitized to the fact that the concern about indigenous people. I came back to Washington really around 2016, looked around and found out we're not doing anything with that. And then I started looking into where you might find evidence of the indigenous people were once here. And that essentially is what I put together to tell the story of the evidence for people having been here, including, well, the Anacostans, of course, were the ones that the colonists first interacted with. But all that evidence is not hard to find. But unfortunately, the American Indian Museum does have an excellent presentation on the Piscataway tribe and the extent of which where it lived, but it doesn't mention specifically the Anacostans, and they're the people who walked the ground where the museum was. And they've said that they have an interest, and I think it's a good one, in telling the story of living tribes. And that's important because the current tribal people have a lot of issues that do need to be focused on. But it does seem to me that somewhere in the museum or online, there might be a little space for the story of the natives who walked the land before the museum was built there, and the rich story of the Anacostans and how they lived in the time after the colonists got here, before they were basically pushed off the land. Um, the the stories get rather complicated. One of my first interests was were they pushed off the land to build a capital? It turns out, no, they were pushed off the land over 100 years before, so the land could be used for tobacco farming. And um, well, the story that's what I put together in my book about the native history of Washington D.C. Um, Not well, the story of the Anacostans is in there, and a lot of modern stories, but also the older findings that one of which was found sort of near the Kennedy Center, has been described as the most important archaeological find in Washington. And there is no marker, there's no evidence anything was ever found there. So that, unfortunately, is the story over and over again, and something that I'd like to see done here, where we not only we talk about our history. And it took a long time before the Black American history of Washington was brought to light, but we're still missing the stories of the Native people who once lived here.
So just to expand on that, your book on DC Native history really just focuses on many of the digs that happened in this area, whether they were at the White House, Georgetown, American University, and what's the importance of these digs, and like why could they sometimes be problematic to say?
Well, recovering some remains and figuring out what they represent, and they were left there thousands of years ago. Let's just acknowledge right away that's going to be difficult. But the reason that I found them and looked into them was, as I sort of was saying, is just that these artifacts, which indicated that villages actually um, the stuff that was found at the White House, when archaeologists find both um, arrowheads and weapon points and pottery, they assumed there was a place where food was prepared and that it was a village site. When hunters were, there's some sites, which there was a site, um, there's a site near the, right in front of where the soccer stadium is, but they only found evidence that it was a temporary hunting, fishing site. But well, you have a record of village life here at various spots that's been uncovered by, um, the problem with a lot of the development of DC was nobody looked. So what didn't get found was largely just because if you're not looking for something, um, unless it's really big and gets in your way. When they were digging the railroad tunnel on Virginia Avenue near 7th Street Southeast, the workers found a canoe, a native canoe. So, if it's something big enough, it'll definitely get your attention. Um, but unfortunately, that was broken up by the workers and taken home. And there's no real record of it, like evidence of it now. But um, things have been found, and they indicate the rich native history of Washington. And Washington, it is the capital city. Um, and it's just not being told. It's sort of like finding out that slave labor built the White House. That was a story that had a sort of break. And, well, our history is lost if it's not acknowledged. And we're making some progress, not necessarily enough, collecting the Black history of Washington. The Native American history is a long way to go.
That was my last question, but I'd just like to thank all of our amazing panelists for answering my questions. And now I'd just like to open it up to audience questions. So we'll just start now.
And so, can you guys hear me? Okay. So before we go to the audience questions, we just wanted to share with you reading Dr. Armand's work on the native history of DC, which, he did what Matt did, which is he went to the tribes. So he worked with the Piscataway, and it's a beautiful book because they start this book and they acknowledge his work, and it was very important, so the acknowledgement was very important. And so I told Bo, who among all the hats that he wears, now he could say he's an archaeologist. So we're digging out the back of the Go-Go Museum and Café, and because we're building a stage, and he's always finding like little seashells and different things. And so I said, Mo, why don't you see what comes out of those things? So I want to show you some things that we found recently that we're getting ready to get checked out. But if you can hold, I'm going to ask you, Camille, if you can hold this real quick. I can use your mic a second. You can hold that for me. Okay, so here, this is a piece of pottery that Mo found out back. And so, it still has the dirt in it. And so we've got soil samples that are here. We also found a lot of shells, like seashells, from the time that, we're not that far from the river, right? So we've got a whole collection of little artifacts here from the Go-Go Museum Café that, Who knows? So we've been in contact. Well, we're getting in contact with the city archaeologists, to have them evaluate this. And sort of that thing is like exactly what you just said. If you don't ask or you don't look, I mean, like this, our whole city is getting turned over. Like they're building everywhere. So it's an opportunity for us to get clues into the past. And so I'm really happy that the Go-Go Museum is also doing that. So thank you, Dr. Mo. For looking into this artifact. So okay, so with that, I want to would love to hear your questions. So questions. I have the mic here. Okay, I'll go back here.
Hello, I'm Jose Vargas. I have a question for the gentleman who was digging up the ancestors. What do you know about the return or the rematuration of those ancestors to their respective peoples?
Well, I think that Jesse Swan can speak to that in more detail because as she was pointing out, what happened was that the native indigenous people were largely pushed away. That may not have happened universally, but what did happen was that some of them went to live with the Iroquois tribe, and actually the Piscataway Conoy tribe gets the Conoy part of its name from the word that the Iroquois used to describe the Piscataways. The word Conoy meant the people below the falls. They lived below the falls in the Potomac here, and out of respect, from what I understand, for the support that the Piscataway got from the Iroquois, they took the Conoy name and incorporated it into their name. But I didn't work on the modern history of the Piscataways. I leave that to the Piscataways who are here. I was working on the part of the history that was pre contact largely, but other aspects of the colonial history I also worked on. But I think Jesse can speak to that in more detail.
To be honest, there's a lot of things that have not been returned to the descendants of the people that were found. There have been some things that have been donated and found to different museums, different collections, that in some ways are being held until appropriate storage facilities can be provided, but in other ways are being given, but not necessarily given back to the right people. One thing to understand is that there's a lot of space. The Piscataway territory is a very large territory, so it is difficult to get these artifacts back to their rightful descendants if you do not do your due diligence as a researcher to figure out who those descendants are. Now, all of this can be mitigated once again if we go back to my point that they have to do their due diligence and someone needs to be present to see what's going on and to make sure that these things are handled correctly. These are people's ancestors. Okay. They have a connection to the earth. When they go to the spirit world, they have a connection to the earth. That's why they're buried with their cedar trees traditionally, and why they're sent with a package in traditional services. So to answer your question, all things aren't properly returned back to the descendants, but by bringing light onto this, as you have, and as this conversation provides, it is a step in the right direction to get things back to their rightful owners.
There's a gentleman here.
Here you go. I'll give him this mic.
Test. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody that made this possible today, because like I can't find nowhere where I can talk this talk right now. Okay, I just can't find nowhere. So this is a huge plus in where this museum is sitting at, because this whole Western hemisphere is the same way. Okay, most of the people in here that look like me are indigenous to America. Okay, when you say See, when you separate it, you say Black and Native American culture. Take the Black out of it, okay? Take the Native out of it. Just put American right there, because that's who we are. We the original Americans that gave this country the name America, not America Vespucci, that gave this name America. So what you're looking at right now, if you're looking at me, I know I'm short or whatever, you're looking at an American. You're not looking at an African. Okay? The only people that were here when the Africans and the Europeans arrived were the Americans, were the Aborigines. That's the name you want right there. That's what to scare everybody, Aborigines, because Aborigines means, when you add meaning from original, meaning the original inhabitants of America. When
So
you
that's
say
a beautiful idea, this American. So can you, what is your question for the panel, sir?
my question, well, it's question and knowledge. My question was that everybody talks about these natives. Who are they?
Sir, I'm sitting right here. So what you mean?
Right,
Who are we?
Okay, you sounded out. Where are these native? Where are these? Where are these indigenous?
One question, and then I think we have other questions.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
We're all from tribe.
Here's another question. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for doing this today, actually. And I'm always hoping to learn more about Native Americans and just every cultural aspect of the city. But I am curious about, and Dr. Leon mentioned it briefly, but what's been your interaction with the National Museum, and what do you think they should be doing to help?
So there's been a lot of, we're reestablishing a lot of connections. As you know, the relationship between the Piscataway people, Native Americans, and formal government has always been an ongoing, strife, we'll say. And then, in modern times, it's kind of a constant evolving relationship that was put on pause thanks to COVID-19. And, we're coming out of that, and we're reestablishing some relations and connections. The biggest thing that I can say would be of assistance is just get with the community and speak to the community to address their individual needs. As people here in DC, I'm not sure if this is talked about enough, but if we start talking about Native Americans and Indian country, and we're always thinking about everything out west, but we forget that there are people still here. Okay, the descendants are still here. The cultural heritage is still here. So they need to embrace that it is still here and spotlight the rich history that is right here in their backyard. The American Indian Museum, located in downtown, that is Native American land. That's Piscataway land. While they have a small section for tribes of the Chesapeake, it's a little inappropriate to be on that land, and we get a small section. No disrespect to the tribes out west, the 5 great nations. That's not what I'm trying to purvey here. However, if you go to Baltimore, you're going to see a bunch of Baltimore Ravens stuff, right? Because that's their team, right? You're going to talk. That's what you're going to talk about. Whenever you come here to DC, you need to talk about DC, and DC would not be DC without the Piscataway and the Anacostans. One thing for sure, 2 things for certain. We're going to continue to talk about it. Yes. And we are going to make sure that we continue these relationships in order to build on and to force these agencies to make a commitment to the First Peoples, because that's how we move forward. That's how we correct the errors in history.
I want to add to that. It's not only that it's Piscataway land, it's sacred land. So you think about what's going on in the country and that they're doing it in a sacred place. Every time you go there, you need to acknowledge that this is sacred land, people underneath it and above it. Also, when you ask what happens, why we need to talk about it, there's a community in Thoroughfare, Virginia, which I've been advocating for. You know about this. The Thoroughfare, also mixed race, and they have a sign, an official sign that said it's a mixed race community. It was one of the settlement towns but it was first settled by, it was thoroughfare because it was a trading area for Native people. It was actually, George Washington was one of the surveyors for that town. After the Civil War, um, Native people and mixed race people, people who knew their history as Welsh, as Pamunkey, as Cherokee, as African Americans settled in that area. And nobody was paying attention to them until 66 needed to make an expansion, until Disney wanted to come after their land, until Amazon wanted to come after their land. They defeated Disney, they defeated Amazon, but a small brewer found an opportunity to buy a house in this very small, obscure community. If you blinked, you would miss it. He found an opportunity to get in there. He got in there and started. First, he just wanted his house. Then Prince William County accidentally forgot to put that there. There were burial grounds. You can't miss it. As you walk through, it's like a half a mile long. As you walk through, there are burial sites on each side, and surrounding them, because they are a mixed people, they have conventional, what we would call conventional burial sites with the headstone that we would recognize, but also their native ancestors buried under the grove of trees, the cedars that she's talking about. If you step on the land, you can feel a depression, and under that depression is a body. He got a tractor. He plowed through the native burial ground. He dug up bodies. He dug up artifacts. And my friend Gina, I don't know if you know Gina, but Gina is one of the descendants. She said she was sitting on her porch and she saw a big dump truck come behind her house. They were throwing away her relatives. That's how serious what she's talking about is. The Shawnee are there, right? We know that uh it's my words miss I can miss the words moh, the mohawk, yes, they are there too. I'm getting older, so words will go up, but I know what I'm talking about. They are buried there too. If you don't talk about it, what they need now is support. These people put up a fight. They got Prince George's County to return to have this man sell back the land. Land he purchased for $300,000. He got paid over $1 million for that land, but he refused to give up the native burial site. Instead, he created a huge mound. This is where their descendants now live, under a huge mound that he has taken a tractor to throw away. Okay, and they have won the right now to sue him, but they need your support. Without the evidence, without the archaeological evidence, they cannot prove that's what he was doing. They cannot prove that this was once native land. And as these people die off, who've been preserving this history, that's how he got the land. Somebody died. Somebody forgot to pay the taxes. That's how he got in. And he does not care. His brewery is more important than that family's history. So you have to, you can read about it. It's in the Washington Post. They're on YouTube. But please look into the people of Thoroughfare. What happened to the people of Thoroughfare is what also happened to the Piscataway. They take it. They take it.
Matt, you look like you want to
Yeah.
say something.
Yeah, I always think about this has been a question I've always wanted to ask. One of the questions, but when I think about names and just being culturally correct with names, um, just with my brothers and sisters from Spanish-speaking countries who may or may not want to be referred to as Hispanic or Latino or Latina, Latinx. My question to you, Jess, is what is the or a culturally appropriate name of identifying Native people from from the area. So we have names that we've used for years, like American Indian, Native American, Indigenous. The list goes on and on and on and on. So without being offensive, what is in by your definition an appropriate way of us identifying in the proper way?
Just like everything else, I want to be clear. This is to me. Now, this is going to change.
That's what I said. It's your opinion.
This is to me. The safest bet is to always go with Native American, anything along those lines, Indigenous. It's you typically the word Indian is received differently to everybody, and it's received differently depending on what exactly you're speaking of in historical references. But it's always best to kind of fill that question out with your audience. But and to me, your safest bet and the most appropriate and well received is Native or Native American. If you know the specific tribe, refer to them as that.
For here, any questions?
Natalie, can I say one other thing?
Sure,
I know I'm
please.
talking a lot. When I was working with the Baltimore Cultural Alliance, can you hear me? Live streaming. Oh, you're live streaming, so you need it. Can we switch? Okay. When I was working with the Baltimore Cultural Alliance, I developed 2 tour guides for our students, for our emerging students. And I think for one of the most important ones was having them travel what is called Piscataway land. I mean, get in the car and start at the foothills of the Appalachia, or even start in Baltimore and go east. Go east as far as you can go until you get water, and then go back west. That's how big the territory is that she's talking about. It's going to take you a long time. And as you travel this land, and as you see all the houses, know that we have a population now, maybe 10 times more than what existed. And ask yourself, why did these people have to die? 80% of her people were killed during the first 100 years of the settlers' arrival. Why did they have to die? There's plenty of room now. What is it that they were doing wrong? They were doing nothing, existing. And how is it that she's able to survive? How is it that she's able to be here? And these are the questions we asked our students. And was interesting what they uncovered in themselves, their own issues that's related to just her existence. Okay.
One thing I do just want to add, I don't know if everybody here is a DC resident, a Maryland resident, wherever you're a resident of, if you be sure to reach out to your local school district, because they don't teach this in the curriculum. And that's we typically most schools give you a good 4 to 6 weeks leading right up to Thanksgiving that they like to talk about the indigenous people and the native people. But this is local history, and it needs to be included in the curriculum. And that's not going to change unless we use our voices to continue to bring light to that. So I encourage you all to reach out to your local school districts and press that we need to share this history with our children, because oral history that I know and oral history that she knows, that ripple effect only goes but so far. But if every child that goes through a DC charter school or goes through a DC public school or goes through a Maryland public school learns about it and they start talking about it, the stories and the history continues to be taught.
Okay, one more, and if it's clear, the question. And we're out of time. Question, right?
I just want to answer your question, like the names. I just wanted to answer your question about the names of, like, what do we want to be called? Because like I said, most of us here in this room are indigenous to America. So the terms I like she said, the tribal term or the term Aborigines. Aborigines, ab meaning from, original meaning original inhabitants of America. This is what we were called. They have the Aboriginals over in Australia, but we have the Aborigines right here in America. and that's most of our greatest grandparents.
Thank you. So I want to thank Phillip, Kulubya, Jesse Swan, Camila Bryce Laporte, Dr. Aman Leon for being an amazing panel. They're here if you have questions, other questions you'd like to ask them. I just want to take privilege of just saying for a minute that this is part of a project that I've been working on for several years called Traditional Arts DC. We just put up our website. It's traditionalartsdc.org. I've been working with Mo and the Go-Go Museum to do oral history. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is different oral history collections and also learning about how you pass on knowledge and knowledge systems, right? So it's having, creating opportunities for master artists to work with younger artists. I'm hoping that Matt, he's in the museum, we already started dreaming about some activations we can do, because this is one way, the sort of archaeological digs and the academic work is one way to learn our history. And then there's also the way that Black Indigenous knowledge systems understand about passing on history, which is through the oral tradition, it's through our art, it's through our creativity. And so we are locked in. We're going to do some more really cool stuff here at the Go-Go Museum now that we have this beautiful space, the recording studio out back. So this is just the beginning of this conversation, and we are going to keep coming back to it because this is what we do. And, part of this is the land acknowledgements. Camila did this mapping study for us a couple years ago as part of this Traditional Arts DC project. And it was just interesting. So who here has heard the land acknowledgements? So they're a thing that have really become into real forefront in the last few years since George Floyd, right? They've really, really come to the forefront where a lot of places begin, we'd like to acknowledge we are on this land, and they call out the different names just like Camila did. And they're really beautiful. A lot of people, so it's a start. But I think this is what Jess and I were just talking about, part of how you acknowledge the land, it's not just acknowledging it, it's doing something about it. And you acknowledge the land by acknowledging the people, the descendants. And it's also actually acknowledging the land, like respect the land, keep it clean the river, go outside. Like that's part of acknowledging the land as well. So thank you everyone for being here today. This will be one of many. Please give us any feedback on how we can sort of, improve the product. But this is the very first conversation in Crank for the Go-Go Museum. So it's really special for you guys to be here with us. Thank you.